It started with that feeling, the fear of being watched, the one that creeps up when you're alone in an empty place and your mind starts telling you things, that someone's looking at you, that maybe you're not as alone as you thought. We've all felt it. But when you're working night shifts at a mannequin factory, that fear hits different. Mannequins just standing there, cold, lifeless, and too close to human. But they aren't human. That was the fear hitting Evan as he pulled into the parking lot on his first night. The place was a ghost town, a factory long past its prime, cold as hell, and silent except for the distant hum of some machine deep in the guts of the building. The kind of place that feels like it's waiting for something. He already hated it. Hated the factory, hated the job, hated his life at that moment. The paycheck was all he had to care about. Stepping out of his car, he muttered, "This is what it's come to." His life felt like it had fallen apart, and this crappy job just made it all worse. The factory loomed over him, its windows dark, lifeless, except for the mannequins. All of them posed, frozen, but somehow too damn real. First patrol wasn't any better. He walked through the showroom, his flashlight sweeping over row after row of mannequins. They all had that perfect glossy skin, blank stares, and they felt like they were staring back. He shook it off, had to, but his mind kept circling back. These things were too human, too lifelike. And then, one stopped him cold. A mannequin that looked exactly like Clara. Yeah, Clara, his ex. The one he tried to forget. Her face, her hair, even the same kind of dress she wore on their last date. What the hell? He laughed it off at first, trying to brush it away as just a coincidence. Not a big deal, he muttered to himself. But it was. The resemblance was insane, and he couldn't shake the feeling that maybe this wasn't just some coincidence. That's when he heard it. A noise. Small, but in a dead quiet factory. It was like a gunshot. He whipped around, expecting to see someone. Anything. But no. Just more mannequins standing there, judging him with those empty eyes. His heart started racing, and his mind went a mile a minute, telling him it was all in his head. But his gut was saying otherwise. The next time he walked through the showroom, Clara's mannequin had moved. It was facing a different direction now, its head tilted like it was watching him. He stopped dead, just staring at it. He checked the security footage later. Nothing. The cameras didn't show it moving. It was like it had just decided to turn on its own. He barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw it. Clara's mannequin standing at the foot of his bed, eyes fixed on him, just watching. When he woke up, soaked in sweat, he knew something was seriously wrong, but he couldn't figure out what. Back at the factory, the footsteps started. He was alone. Supposed to be alone. But every few minutes, he'd hear them, soft, echoing through the halls, just out of sight. He'd turn around, ready to catch someone messing with him, but the hallways were always empty. Just more mannequins, standing in their creepy poses. And then there was Vincent, the boss. One night he showed up, walking through the factory with a smile that didn't fit the situation. He gave Evan a tour, talking about the mannequins like they were his children, like they were something special. "Some of them have a story," he said, his smile stretching in a way that made Evan's skin crawl. He didn't elaborate, didn't need to. The way he said it was enough to make Evan want to get out of there fast. But he didn't leave. He stayed, even when the mannequin that looked like Clara kept bothering him. He was obsessed, checking it every shift. It wasn't just the face, it was the way it was posed, the way it was dressed. It was Clara, down to every last detail, and that freaked him out more than anything. Something wasn't right, but he couldn't figure out what. Then came the voice. He swore he heard it. Clara's voice. Faint, distorted, like it was coming from far away, but definitely there. "You left me," it said. A whisper, but it froze him in his tracks. Two new guys came in for the night shift. Sam and Jake, classic dumb jocks. All muscle, no brain, more interested in goofing off than actually working. They joked about the mannequins, totally oblivious to how much they were freaking Evan out. Sam thought it'd be hilarious to play a prank on him one night, moving the mannequins into creepy positions. When Evan walked into the room and saw them, he lost it. Sam burst out laughing, but the joke stopped being funny when Sam swore he hadn't moved Clara's mannequin. One night, Clara's mannequin vanished. Evan felt relief at first, until he turned a corner and saw it standing at the end of the hallway. His stomach dropped. There was no way it could have moved that fast. Evan confronted Vincent, desperate for answers. Vincent's smile was back, that weird, unsettling grin. He told Evan the mannequins were modeled after people who disappeared. People who just vanished without anyone noticing. "You'd be surprised how many people go missing," he said with a wink that made Evan's blood run cold. Clara's voice got louder after that. "You abandoned me," she said. "You didn't save me." The words echoed in his head, growing louder every shift, but when he turned around, there was never anyone there. Just the mannequin. The breaking point came when Evan saw Clara's mannequin move. Not a trick of the light, not a figment of his imagination. It moved. Its head turned slowly, its eyes locking onto his. He froze, terror gripping him like a vice. He thought he'd survived it. He thought he'd get out, walk away from this nightmare. But as he ran for the exit, Vincent's words echoed in his mind. "They're modeled after people who disappeared." And then it hit him. The real twist. He wasn't just watching the mannequins, he was one. Evan stared at the mannequin's face, her face, locked in that moment where everything stopped making sense. Clara's eyes, or what passed for them, followed him, twisting slowly as if they had a mind of their own. His legs gave out before he could even think, and the world went black. When he came to, Sam and Jake were standing over him, laughing like idiots. "Bro, you passed out." Sam slapped him on the shoulder. Evan sat up, dazed, his mouth dry, and his head pounding like he'd been slammed into a wall. He didn't even try to explain what he'd seen. What was he going to say? That a mannequin moved? That Clara wasn't just a memory anymore? "Just too much caffeine, right?" Sam joked, but Evan didn't even have the energy to tell him to shut up. He forced himself to his feet, shaking off the dizziness. But something was wrong. Something was more wrong than before. Later that night, while Sam and Jake were off somewhere goofing around, Evan decided to check Vincent's office. There was something about the way Vincent talked about the mannequins that stuck with him, that slimy smile that never felt right. He had to know more. He slipped into the office, flicking on the light, his heart racing like a rabbit caught in a trap. Papers were scattered everywhere, but what caught his eye were the sketches. Sketches of mannequins, but not just any mannequins. These were people, real people. Faces he recognized from the city. Some of them looked too familiar, too close to people he'd passed on the street, people he'd seen at the grocery store. But they weren't just drawings. They were missing posters in mannequin form. And then there was Clara, right there in one of Vincent's drawings. A perfect copy of her face. A chill ran down Evan's spine. He stumbled back, knocking over a stack of papers, his mind racing. This was real. Clara wasn't just a mannequin. She was the mannequin. But before he could process it, the door swung open. Sam and Jake came crashing in, laughing like maniacs. "You gotta see this, man," Jake called out. "We've got something that'll scare the pants off you." Evan followed, too rattled to argue, but he knew whatever they had planned was a dumb joke. He could tell by the way they were giggling like little kids, and sure enough, they had one of the mannequins rigged up, pretending it was following him, dragging it across the floor on some rope. "Gotcha," Jake yelled. But just as Evan was about to lose his temper, the mannequin moved. Not a nudge or a stumble. It moved on its own. Sam's face went white, and before Evan could react, Sam was running like his life depended on it. Evan didn't see Jake after that night. Sam showed up to work the next day, but Jake, gone. No call, no message, just disappeared. Evan asked around, but no one knew a thing. He had a sinking feeling it wasn't a coincidence. Not after what he saw. Not after the way the mannequin had moved. The way it stared at him like it knew something he didn't. The factory was starting to close in on him. Clara's mannequin wasn't just standing around anymore. One night, Evan turned a corner and saw it walking toward him. Its plastic face twisted into a smile that was too real, too familiar. He froze, his heart racing, unable to believe his own eyes. But it wasn't a dream. He could feel it, the cold air, the silence pressing down on him. She was there. She was real. Things only got worse from there. The other mannequins, they started moving too. Every time Evan wasn't looking, they shifted, their heads turning to watch him as he passed. It wasn't long before they were forming a circle, trapping him in the showroom. His breath caught in his throat as he stood in the middle of them. Every mannequin staring him down, their plastic hands just inches from his skin. Sam confessed to him one night. Said he'd been hearing voices too. Said he was quitting before it got worse. "I can't do this, man," he whispered, his face pale. But before Sam could make good on his plan, he disappeared too, just like Jake. Evan knew it wasn't just bad luck or bad timing. The mannequins had something to do with it. They had to. Evan confronted Vincent again, desperate for answers. "What's happening here? What are they?" he demanded, his voice trembling. Vincent's grin stretched across his face, more snake than man. "The mannequins are modeled after people who lost their way," he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. And then he said what Evan had been dreading all along. "Clara, she's been here the whole time." Evan's world started to unravel. Everywhere he looked, he saw Clara's mannequin. It haunted him, showing up in places it couldn't be. In his apartment, on the streets, even in his dreams. There was no escaping it. It was like she was following him no matter where he went. He searched for Sam, desperate for some kind of help, but all he found was Sam's uniform. It was folded neatly in front of a mannequin that looked exactly like him. That's when Evan understood. The mannequins weren't just modeled after people. They were people. The factory was full of them. People who had vanished, turned into lifeless plastic. Evan knew he was next. The mannequins were closing in on him, watching his every move, waiting for the right moment. He could feel it in his bones, the cold hands of fate tightening around his throat. One night, the factory locked itself down. The doors wouldn't budge, the lights flickered, and Evan was trapped inside with the mannequins. Clara's voice echoed in his head, louder now, filling every corner of his mind. "You didn't save me." He couldn't escape. Not until he faced the truth he'd buried so deep. Even he had forgotten it. He'd left Clara behind. The night she disappeared, he had walked away. She had called for him, begged him to help, but he had been too wrapped up in his own failures to hear her. And now she was here, haunting him. The mannequins surrounded him, their cold hands reaching out. He fought, but it was useless. They were too strong. He felt his body stiffen, his skin turning cold and smooth. When he looked down, he saw it. His skin was turning to plastic. In those final moments, he realized what this was. This was his punishment for abandoning her, for walking away. He was becoming one of them, just another mannequin, frozen in time. And then it was over. Evan was gone. His face, now plastic and lifeless, stared out from the showroom watching as Mr. Vincent welcomed the next security guard into the factory. The cycle was starting again. As the new guard walked by, he glanced at Evan's mannequin and shivered, feeling its eyes on him, but he brushed it off. Vincent's voice echoed through the factory, smooth and haunting. "Everyone gets a second chance here, even you." Story 2. I sat there on the curb, staring at my hands like they didn't even belong to me anymore. They were trembling so bad I couldn't control it. I looked into the store window and barely recognized my reflection. It wasn't even human. It was wrong. My skin looked plastic, shiny, like one of those stupid mannequins we were always stuck dealing with. God, what just happened? It started like any other night, really. Derek was messing around, acting like the dumbass he always is. He thought it'd be hilarious to sneak up on me in the stockroom and grab my shoulder, shouting, "Boo!" right in my ear. Of course, I jumped out of my skin like a freaking idiot. "You're not funny, Derek," I muttered, pushing him away. But deep down, I already felt that familiar anxiety bubbling up. The place just felt off that night. Derek wasn't helping. Then there was Mr. Harlow. That guy. He was just standing there by the doorway, not saying a word, just staring at us like we weren't even people. His eyes were locked on the mannequins behind us, like they were the only thing that mattered in the entire world. It gave me the creeps, but Derek, as usual, made some crack about Harlow probably wanting to marry one of his precious mannequins. I didn't laugh. Harlow's silence freaked me out, but I kept it to myself. Later, while sorting through the stock, I knocked one of those damn mannequins over. The arm snapped off clean. My heart skipped a beat. It felt like I'd hurt someone for real. I knelt down, trying to fix it, but the mannequins seemed different tonight. Fragile, like they weren't just objects anymore. I knew it was stupid, but it felt like they were watching me. Derek couldn't find his jacket. He started blaming me, of course, said I probably hid it as a joke. Typical Derek. He kept laughing and making stupid comments, like maybe one of the mannequins took it. I wasn't in the mood for his nonsense, though. The air felt thick, heavy, and I swear, from the corner of my eye, I saw one of those mannequins move. I whipped around, but it was still, stiff as ever. My nerves were on edge. I told myself it was just my imagination, but I didn't really believe it. Mr. Harlow left early that night, mumbled something about checking his collection, and just walked out. The second he left, everything felt wrong. The store got darker, the air heavier. I swear the second he stepped out the door, the whole place shifted. I tried to tell myself it was just me overthinking, but something wasn't right. Not tonight. I went back to the stockroom, and that's when I noticed the mannequins were arranged differently. They weren't in the same spots I'd left them. They were all facing the back door now, standing in this weird formation. I rubbed my eyes, convinced I was losing it, but the more I stared, the less I could shake it off. Derek thought it'd be funny to jump out from behind a row of mannequins again. He scared me so bad. I screamed without even thinking. He just stood there, looking confused, like he didn't mean to startle me that much. But something was off. He wasn't laughing anymore, and neither was I. There was this silence. It swallowed the whole store. No more jokes, no more noise, just silence. It felt like the walls were breathing. Every sound I heard after that seemed louder. Every shadow seemed longer. My anxiety skyrocketed. I started compulsively checking my phone. Derek was still wandering around, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that the mannequins were somehow alive. Derek disappeared at some point, just slipped away into the darkness of the store, leaving me alone with these things. I called for him, but he didn't answer. Instead, my phone buzzed. A message from Derek. "I'm in the back. Don't come here." Don't come here? What the hell did that mean? A chill ran through me, but I couldn't help myself. I had to go. I headed for the stockroom. When I got there, everything felt wrong. The mannequins were all around me, their empty eyes, staring without moving. But somehow, they were alive. I could feel them watching, and then I heard it. Faint whispers like voices from deep inside the walls calling my name. My heart pounded in my chest, but I couldn't see anyone else. The mannequins, those damn mannequins, they were the source. Without moving, they were calling to me. In the middle of the stockroom, they were arranged in a perfect circle. I swear they weren't like that before. They were waiting for something. I knew it. My heart raced, panic rising in my throat. I called for Derek, louder this time, but nothing. Just more silence. I tore through the store, knocking over mannequins, their limbs breaking off like brittle bones, but no matter how many I knocked down, more seemed to take their place. Another message popped up on my phone. Derek again. "It's too late, Lena. We're part of them now." My hands shook so badly I couldn't dial his number. The mannequins, all of them, started closing in on me. Their heads tilted slightly toward me, eyes cold and empty as if they were waiting to devour me whole. I backed up, my breath catching in my throat, and then I ran. I didn't stop running until I hit the curb outside, staring at my reflection in the window, and now I'm here. Sitting on the curb, not sure if I even made it out. Maybe I didn't. Maybe I'm one of them now. Maybe I've been part of them all along. Derek came back, but it wasn't the Derek I knew. Something in his eyes was wrong, like there was nothing behind them anymore. His skin looked different too, all waxy, like he'd been dipped in some cheap plastic. He moved in these stiff, jerky motions like a puppet on strings, and my heart sank. I whispered, "Derek?" But I already knew the answer. He wasn't Derek anymore. He wasn't anything anymore. I grabbed him by the shoulders, tried shaking him, screaming his name like it would snap him out of whatever trance he was in. But all he did was grin. This horrible, lifeless grin that made my stomach twist. "We're all part of the collection now," he said, his voice flat, robotic, like he wasn't even human anymore. I stepped back, panic rising in my chest. What the hell did that mean? Then it hit me. Mr. Harlow. He was always talking to those mannequins like they were real people. I used to think it was just some creepy quirk, something harmless. But what if it wasn't? What if those mannequins weren't just mannequins? A horrible thought crept into my mind. What if this was what he did to people? What if this was what he did to his employees? I didn't stick around to find out. I bolted for the door, but Derek and the mannequins, they moved fast, faster than they should have been able to. It was like they knew every corner of the store, every aisle, and no matter where I turned, they were there cutting me off. My heart was pounding in my throat, but I wasn't about to give up. I wasn't about to be part of whatever sick collection this was. I stumbled into a mirror, and that's when I saw it. My reflection. It wasn't me. My face. It looked pale, drained, like the life had been sucked out of it. My skin wasn't skin anymore. It was harder, colder, plastic. I screamed, but my reflection didn't. It just stared back at me with those dead, empty eyes. I touched my face, and it was real. Cold, hard plastic. My fingers were stiff, barely moving. I was becoming one of them. My own body was betraying me, transforming into the same hollow shell that Derek had become. I wanted to cry, to scream, but my voice was caught in my throat. And then, as if on cue, Mr. Harlow walked back into the store. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look concerned. He just smiled, that soft, calm smile that made me want to rip my own skin off. "You were always meant to be part of the collection," he said, his voice gentle, almost soothing, like he was doing me a favor. Like this was my destiny all along. I tried to fight it. God, I tried. But it was no use. I could feel myself slipping away, my limbs growing heavier, harder. Derek's face, what was left of it, shifted in front of me, his features melting into that of a mannequin. The person I knew was gone, replaced by something hollow, something plastic, and soon I'd be gone too. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I fumbled to pull it out with my stiff, uncooperative fingers. It was another message from Derek, or at least whatever was left of him. "We're all one now." That was all it said. Derek stepped closer, his face inches from mine, his breath cold against my cheek. "You can't leave, Lena," he whispered. "You never could." That's when the front door slammed shut, locking me inside. I was trapped. There was no escape now, no way out of whatever nightmare this was. The mannequins circled around me and Derek, their faces blank, emotionless. And then they started whispering again. My name. Over and over. Soft voices calling me, welcoming me to their world. I knew it was over. The transformation was complete. I could feel my emotions slipping away, my thoughts dulling. I wasn't Lena anymore. I wasn't even human. I was a mannequin now, just like the rest of them. The friend I grew up with, the person I'd laughed with, was gone forever. And soon I would be too. I stood there motionless, frozen in place. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. But I could think. I could feel. I was still aware. Days passed, maybe weeks, I don't know. Time didn't exist anymore. Not for me. Not for any of us. Then one day the door opened. A new employee walked in, excited for their first shift. I watched them walk past me, oblivious to what was waiting for them. I wanted to scream, to warn them, to tell them to run, but I couldn't. I was stuck. I was part of the collection now. They started organizing the mannequins, just like I had done, and the same eerie events began to unfold. The whispers, the strange movements, the growing fear. The cycle was starting all over again, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. And as my final thought faded away, the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. Mr. Harlow never collected mannequins. He collected people.